How you doing, mates? My name is Anderson, and today I have a sweet ass video for ya. You read the title, you know what's going down. Basically, the kinds of tips I'll be giving you guys here today are the kinds of tips I would give my past self if he was starting game development right now. The video will be divided into two sections. The first section is to help you make your very first game. I know, that's awesome. The second part will be random beginner tips from other game devs. And with that out of the way, let's get started. And the first tip I have for you is to choose your game engine. The game engine will take care of the technical side of game development. Things like physics calculations, rendering graphics, you know, the kinds of things you don't want to do. There are lots of game engines to choose from. Back when I started game development, the only game engines people talked about were Unity and Unreal Engine. But nowadays, there are way more options to choose from. I suggest you choosing an engine that has a good amount of tutorials you can follow, or an active community that can help you out. This community can be in Reddit, Discord, forums, etc. I personally use Unity because it has the tools that I need to make both 2D games and 3D games. Remember, this isn't the be-all end-all decision of your game development journey. You can always change engines if you don't like it. Once you've downloaded your game engine, try playing around with it. See what you can figure out by yourself, without any tutorials. This will help you familiarize yourself with the engine. If you're thinking about making your own game engine, don't. If you make your own game engine, you're not only going to be dealing with your game's bugs, but the game engines as well. And from what I heard, it's not easy to make a game engine. So I suggest using an already existing game engine. It's probably for the best. But Anderson, what about programming? If you're afraid of programming, I have two things to tell you. Number one, programming isn't hard. There are many tutorials out there that can teach you how to program. I would suggest you looking for programming tutorials as you need them for your game. You don't need to know everything about programming before you start making your games. And number two, if you really don't want to program, there are game engines like Unreal Engine, Game Maker Studio, Buildbox, Construct 3. These engines don't require you to program, but instead they use what is called visual scripting. If you're an artist or something like that, then this is actually a good option for you because you probably don't plan on learning how to program. But if you plan on actually becoming a programmer, I would suggest you to stay away from visual scripting and just go into, actual programming, because you might pick up some bad habits. Besides your game engine, you're most likely going to need other software to help you in the game making process. When making your first game though, you probably won't need these tools. Probably. But I'm going to tell you about them anyway because you're definitely gonna need them for your future games, so take notes. I'll keep this section very short because I just want to tell you what you might need and give you some suggestions. Cool? Cool. First up is a software for planning, because planning is super important. I cannot stress that enough. When you decide to tackle any kind of project, you should plan, because it'll give you a sense of direction and progression. Hey, that rhymed. The first software I will suggest is Trello. In Trello, you can create boards that will have cards, and these cards can contain information like tasks, inspiration for your game, pictures, images, or whatever. You decide, man, you decide. If you want something simple and organized, this is the way to go. But if you're more of a visual thinker, then I would suggest Milanote. It allows you to connect boards, lists, images, etc. just like you would on a notebook. Both of these tools are free, and they're pretty great. Next up, we have art. There are different kinds of arts, and most likely they will need different kinds of software. For general image editing, you can use Photoshop, but it's obviously paid. A free alternative would be GIMP. Being free, it has its limitations, but it's regarded as the best free image editor, so it must be doing something right. Right? For pixel art, you can use Sprite, which is paid, and the free alternative would be Piskel. I personally haven't worked with these tools, but from what I heard, Sprite has an easier workflow, and a couple of other features that make it stand out compared to Piskel. For vector art, you can use Adobe Illustrator, which is paid. A free alternative is Inkscape. And just like the other software, Illustrator has a couple of features that make it stand out compared to, Inkscape. But a free software is better than no software, am I right? Or am I right? For 3D modeling, we have Blender, which is free! Haha! Yup, that's it. Only Blender. Okay, fine, there are definitely other options, but if you start looking for 3D modeling tutorials on YouTube, you're most likely going to be finding ones on Blender. So that's my suggestion. Up next, we have audio, and audio is pretty important because it can add a little oomph to your game, if you know what I mean. For general audio editing, we have Audacity, which is free. You can edit your audios, add effects, and just making them sound better. What else could you want? For music creation, we have FL Studio, which is paid. We also have Reaper. Nope, not that Reaper. This Reaper. Reaper is technically free because you have a 60-day trial and people claim that after that you don't need to pay it, but I can't confirm this myself because I haven't used the tool, but you can check it out for yourself. An actual free alternative is Chol. Although it's very basic, it's great to make 8-bit music. Just listen to this. And finally, for sound effects, we have not a software, but instead a downloadable audio bundle called Game Audio GDC. They have a variety of sound effects, and they have yearly bundles that started all the way back from 2015. Now that's a lot. And our last software category is video. For video editing, we have Sony Vegas and Adobe Premiere, both of which are paid. When it comes to the best software, it's not that simple because it depends on your needs. Personally, I started using Sony Vegas, and since I just wanted simple video editing, I didn't really feel the need to try Adobe Premiere because Sony Vegas already had everything that I needed. However, there is a free alternative called DaVinci Resolve.
DaVinci?
I personally haven't tried it or heard much about it, so I can't really tell you anything about it. I might try it though. I mean, it's free. That's it for the software you might need. Remember that the ones I mentioned here are simply my suggestions, so if they don't suit your needs, you can look for one yourself. Next, we're going to talk about what game you're going to make. Right away, I can tell you for sure that your first game should not be your dream game. Because let's be honest, you probably don't know much about game development yet. I'm sorry. Your dream game definitely requires a lot of experience, and experience only comes from making other games. So, what game can you make? A super simple game. The simpler the better. Think Pong, Flappy Bird, a super simple 2D platformer, or maybe even an infinite dodger. Don't think RPG, open world game, or even a sandbox game. When I tried making my first game, I was making a super ambitious 3D horror game. The scope was just too big, and because of it, I eventually lost motivation. Because the more I built the game, the more I realized how much work I had ahead of me, and most of which I didn't know how to do. The simplest game I can think of right now is a game where you literally just press a button and you win. Like, that's it. That's as simple as it can get. If you evolve that idea, you can use that button to make a simple square jump. Then, make the square move on its own. After that, add some obstacles, some music, and boom! You've made Geometry Dash! You should think of your first game as a practice exercise for your future games. That will be awesome. So again, the simpler the better. The next step is crucial to any project, and that is research. Now you should be looking for tutorials, articles, or anything else that will help you make your game. For the tutorials, assuming they're on YouTube of course, go down to the comment section and see what people think about it. If there are too many people asking for help, maybe consider looking for another tutorial. But Anderson, I can't find the tutorials for the game I want to make. Well, in that case, you should try being more specific with the tutorials you're trying to look for. By this, I mean look for tutorials that get a very specific part of your game working. For example, character movement, character animation, and if you still can't find the tutorials, here's what you're gonna do. Listen closely. Come on. Listen closely. I want you to take that game idea of yours, write it down somewhere, and leave it so that you can come back to it later once you've gained enough experience. Because right now, you're gonna go back to the previous tip and look for another game idea. Remember, the simpler the better. For your first game, it's okay to have tutorials for everything you're going to make. Because what I want you to get out of this first game is that feeling of accomplishment. Even with the simplest game, that feeling of accomplishment, it's what's going to drive you to make your future games. And that's awesome! Besides researching how to implement your game mechanics, you should also research about art and audio. For audio, you can have different sound effects that play whenever something specific happens in your game. For example, when you press a button, when the player wins, or when the player loses. Those are sound effects you can have for... There's also music. You can have background music, music in the main menu, music in the options menu, music for different stages. Possibilities are endless. But this is just your first game, so come on, say it with me. The simpler the better. Then we have art. You can have 2D or 3D art. Some games have both. If you can't draw or model, there's no problem. You can use free assets online or just make a game using simple shapes. It's your first game, so there's no big deal in that. Maybe you're an artist and you want a more visually appealing game. Well, in that case, you can make a game with simple gameplay but beautiful aesthetics. That's right, I said aesthetics, not graphics. Those are two different things. Wanna know the difference? Check out this video by Extra Credits. It's pretty great. Now, you have your game engine, you have your tutorials, you have your game idea. What else do you need? Nothing. Get to building that game. This is the fun part. The part where you finally get something working. You'll probably get bugs. That's normal. You'll probably feel stuck. That's normal. You'll probably feel like giving up. Don't! If you truly believe your game idea is simple and you found the right tutorials for it, then I'm sure you will succeed. I want to see that first game. Come on. Show it to me. Come on. And once you succeed, won't you be proud of yourself? Be honest. There are a couple of things you should keep in mind during the stage. The first being that you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help. Let's be honest. Sometimes we think we are bothering someone by asking them for help, so we rather deal with the problem ourselves. Don't do this. You might as well just save yourself some time and ask for help, because eventually you will ask for help, so might as well just do it right away. But you gotta try to figure it out a little bit, because you can't just feel stuck once and then just go ask for help. Try dealing with the problem yourself. If you truly can't find a way out, then you can ask for help. Also, don't start your questions by saying it's a dumb question, because if you're struggling with it, the answer is probably not that obvious. The second thing you should keep in mind is to use game assets. If you don't know what game assets are, it's basically the game's content. You know, things like the characters, the animations, the models, the music, the sound effects. Game assets are great because they can save you time in game development. Someone already did that job for you. Now you can use it. But be aware of the kind of license that asset has and how you plan on using it. There are many licenses that can be used in many different ways. You should do your own research on this, as I'm not a lawyer, obviously. But my rule of thumb is, if you're confused about the license, don't use it. And the third thing you should keep in mind is having no zero days. A no zero day is a day where you ensure that you get something done in your game, no matter how small. I would suggest you to work on your game every day for at least 30 minutes. And trust me, if you get in the flow within those 30 minutes, you'll probably be working on your game for an hour or two before you even realize it. Do this every single day, and you'll be amazed with your results after a week. I mentioned before that I use Unity as my game engine, and if you chose Unity as your game engine, you can get started by watching my first video, which is a 2D character movement tutorial. Oh, would you look at that? It's feeding time, not for me, for the algorithm. I'm pretty sure you're enjoying this video up until now. So don't smash that like button, gently tap on it so that other people can use it as well. While you're at it, gently tap the subscribe button as well, because why not? Now, we're getting into the second section of this video, which is the beginner tips from the other game devs. We have lots of tips, so I'll try being as quick and thorough as possible. Our first tip comes from Nour Bou Nasr. Thanks for the tip. He says you should break down your project into small parts and work on each of them, which makes sense if you think about it. This tip goes well with my tip about researching your project. You can't just tell yourself you're going to create a cool character. First, you have to make him move. Then you have to give him some kind of sword maybe, and maybe even 6 arms so that he can stop a friggin' giant from outer space from destroying the planet. The game is yours. You make the rules. Our next tip comes from Jonas. Thanks, Jonas. And this tip is to ask yourself why you want to make games. If you want to make games for fun, you should work on projects that you will love to work on. If you want to make games for a living, you should consider cost effectiveness, marketability, and marketing as well. And if you want to learn new skills, you should work on projects that will challenge your skills. When picking up a new project, you should always try to challenge yourself so that you can grow as a game dev. Preferably challenge yourself in the areas that you are not comfortable in. Our next tip, also from Jonas, says that you need to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. How can you use your strengths to your advantage? How can you get around your weaknesses? How much risk are you willing to take? And where should you take those risks and where should you not? For example, me as a programmer, I should strive for great systems and mechanics in my games. But since I'm not that great with art, I should find a way to get around this weakness or make that weakness my strength. Another tip from Jonas is to define your goal. Are you making games for money? To make your dream game? To make people happy? How do you prioritize these goals? Figuring out your goals in game development can be pretty hard. Depending on your goal, no matter how simple or complex it is, it's going to change how you make your games in the future. You should enjoy the process of making the game, learning as much as you can, problem solving, and trust me, there will be lots of problems. And if you don't enjoy this process, you will end up making bad games, or even worse, give up. I wouldn't want that to happen to you. No one would. So make sure you enjoy the process. Or else. The next tip comes from Codeer. Thanks, Codeer. And he said you should just start making stuff. Just experiment. The sooner you start your first project, the better. You'll get better over time. Think of when you were a baby. You didn't just get born and suddenly you're running. No, you were first carried, then you started to crawl, then you started to walk, then you could run, and eventually we're gonna fly. Moving on, the next tip comes from Simon Jakobsson. Thanks, Simon Jakobsson. And he says you should make small games focused on a single mechanic at a time. And when he says small, he means small. Think demo rather than game. This is actually a good way to make games and find out if your idea is good or not. If it is, you can expand on it. Two pretty popular games were developed in a similar fashion to this. I'm of course talking about Celeste and Hollow Knight. Simon Jakobsson also mentioned that Downwell was developed this way. All of these games were made in game jams before evolving into something much bigger. Oh, if you don't know what a game jam is, it's a contest where participants have to make a game from scratch when they usually have about 48 hours to do so. The next tip, also from Simon Jakobsson, says, a rich story and lots of lore does not make a game. The part which makes it a game are the mechanics. Focus on making engaging mechanics before you start to dream about your story. No one cares about your story more than you do, and no one will care to hear that story if it doesn't come with a good set of game mechanics. This is true. Even if you know your story is awesome, no one will care to hear it if they don't want to play the game in the first place. So to summarize, engaging mechanics. Moving on! The next tip comes from Nick Paladino. His first tip is to build the habit of getting inside the game engine or a discipline-specific software every day, regardless of whether it's connected to an assignment, side project, or just learning. He's right, because as an indie game developer, you're going to be wearing lots of hats. By that I mean, you're going to have lots of jobs. You're going to be your own game designer, your own gameplay programmer, your own artist, and maybe sound designer? Sound composer? I don't know. And playing around with different software will help you get familiar with these areas. But Anderson, what if I pay someone to do those things for me? Or what if I make a game with a friend? Well, you'll probably be wearing less hats, but you'll still be wearing lots of hats. Our next tip, also from Nick, is to build up your skills and learn by doing. Start building your portfolio early and constantly challenge yourself. Building up skills is very important because those are the skills that will help you make bigger and better games in the future. Also, building your portfolio early is a great thing because it will help you show your employers, your partners, or maybe even your employees what you're capable of. They'll be amazed. The next tip, also from Nick, is to ignore the pangs of perfectionism and never compare yourself to others. It's only best to compare yourself and your work to what you were yesterday and learn how you can improve yourself. I couldn't have said it better myself. There. Another tip, also from Nick, is to play games. This tip may seem obvious, but not that obvious. Sure, you can play great games, but you should also play bad games, because you can learn a lot more from the bad games rather than from the good games. Ask yourself what makes these games good or bad, and how you can use those lessons to make your games good, or even great, or amazing. Our next tip, also from Nick, is to ask help when you need it. He says that the games industry is filled with amazingly talented and passionate people that are willing to help you out if you ask politely. And once you've made it, you should also try to consider helping others. Again, I couldn't have said it better myself. And our final tip from Nick is to start small. You always hear this from other game devs, and it can't be stated enough. Don't start by building your most ambitious game. That comes later. This is probably the third time we've had this tip in this video, and I can't emphasize it enough. Start small. You might be good, but you're not good enough to be making that dream game you're thinking about. You should build your skills up to that level of game dev. Our next tip comes from Vimlark. Thanks, Vimlark. And his biggest beginner tip is to try not to make a big project right away. Make smaller projects that you can learn from for a good while. If you have a larger game that you want to make, try making little projects that just use certain elements of that big game. And when the time comes for you to implement the things from the smaller games in the larger game, it'll be easier because you already have experience with it. The next tip comes from KaizenCreed. Thanks, mate. And he says that there is probably no way that you can make the game you desire right away. But instead, there are games that you can make that will allow you to feel comfortable in a game engine like Unity or Unreal, for example. I told you before that you should play around with the game engine so that you can familiarize yourself with it. But there are certain tools that you will only get to fully explore once you actually make a game. The next tip, also from KaizenCreed, is to allow yourself to come up with your own solution before trying someone else's. This makes you explore your own idea and logic. You can then verify other ways of doing things and expand your knowledge. This is true. As a programmer, for example, I've realized that the best solutions tend to be my own, because I know exactly what I want and how I want it. I'm sure this also applies to artists, sound designers, etc. His next tip is to try out free software to get your concepts down. You'll be able to get straight into putting your ideas into practice. You don't want to use a month or two on subscription just learning the basics when you can do that with the free software. Like we said before, free software better than no software, am I right? And his last tip is about informative Discord servers. These are a must. You can learn a lot from other game devs. They may not spoon feed you all of the information, but you will learn a lot of valuable tips and tricks. Now, the rest of the tips in this section come from an amazing wizard. Literally. He shared lots of tips with us, and I'm going to do my best to explain each and every one of them as quickly as I can. Number 1. Don't rush things while learning. Learn one topic at a time, and don't worry if you don't know how to do something. Try to search for some tutorials or come back to that topic after a while. Don't give up when you hit a wall. Instead, try focusing on other things during this time. Number 2. Escape animator hell. If you're using Unity, then try not to use transitions between animations in the animator window. This video by Lost Relic Games is about escaping animator hell. He also explains why it's a bad habit and you should try avoiding it as much as possible. It will improve your game's performance and make dealing with animations much easier. I agree with this. I actually implemented this in the 2D fighting game I'm working on, and suddenly animations weren't so much of a pain in the behind to work on. For your first game, you probably shouldn't be worried too much about this. Just do whatever you want. But after your first game, you should consider picking up this habit. Number 3. Don't start a big project as your first project. Start small. It's the 4th time we have this tip on this video. Number 4. Read lots of books and follow their tutorials. They are usually better than articles and blogs on the internet because they dive into very specific topics. I agree with this. While I'm not that much of a reader myself, I do have 2 books that I would recommend for you. The first one, I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of it, and that is The Animator Survivor Kit. Pretty much any video that you watch that talks about the 12 principles of animation is going to mention this book. The next one I'll recommend is Game Feel by Steve Swink. It talks about the different aspects of the game that make it feel juicy. Number 5. When searching for books, search for books with very specific topics. You will learn about making games much faster that way. Number 6. You have a nice idea in mind for a game? Create a demo of this game and show it to your close gaming friends to get their feedback. Post it on some sites with games like itch.io, Reddit, Congregate, etc. Don't worry about people stealing your idea, because you will need to get some feedback eventually. And what's the point of making a game if you don't know if people want to play it or not? Moving on. Number 7. Marketing is very important. You need to know the market, and you need to know that it's always changing. For example, right now, a very specific genre might be popular, but after a year or two, it might not be that popular anymore. Number 8. Don't copy games when making a game that you are trying to sell. If you are learning, then it's an excellent way to learn. What he means in not copying games is you shouldn't clone games. Number 9. When planning your release, don't release a game before or after a big Steam sale, for example. Most users would probably spend their money on the sales or other AAA games. And number 10. Don't hesitate to ask others for help. We've said that before. And again, don't be afraid. Just ask for help. What are you doing? Ask! The last tip of this section is actually an advanced tip, and that is to use object pooling. Imagine you're playing Call of Duty, and imagine that the game has to spawn a new bullet every time you shoot your weapon. I'm pretty sure you know that that'd be heavy on the performance. What these games do instead is they spawn all of the bullets that you might need and keep them hidden. Once the player shoots a weapon, they just go get those bullets and, use them. Then when the bullets get destroyed, they're just getting hidden again. It might seem like the bullets are getting spawned and destroyed, but they're actually not. This is what object pooling is. Basically, it's hiding your objects instead of destroying them, and enabling them again when you need to use them. If you're a beginner, you don't have to worry much about your game's performance right away. That's something you get better over time. But you should consider using object pooling eventually because it will greatly improve your game's performance. That is, if your game needs it. Special thanks to all of the game devs who made this video possible. Nour Bou Nasr, Jonas Tyroller, Codeer, Simon Jakobsson, Nick Paladino, Vimlark, KaizenCreed, and an amazing wizard. All of these game devs are on Twitter. You can follow the links to their accounts down in the description. Some of them also have their own YouTube channel, and some of them are also working on their own game. So go follow, subscribe, wishlist their games. Game dev can be tough when you're not sure where you're going. Hopefully, these tips will give you a quick head start and help you throughout your game dev journey. If this video inspired you to make your very first game, let me know down in the comments what game you're going to make. I'm very curious. This channel is all about game dev, with tutorials, devlogs, and other interesting stuff planned for the future. So subscribe to get yourself a tasty choco milk. I'll see you guys in the next video. As always, stay awesome. It's almost 4 in the morning and I'm still making this video. Why am I still here? I should be in bed. Goodbye. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep now. See ya.